Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Preserving Communities, Brownfield Redevelopment to Minimize Displacement and Uplift Legacy Residents. As always, we're excited to have you all here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend it with us. Today, we've invited a few experts that will highlight how brownfield redevelopment can be harnessed as a means of community renewal while still maintaining community roots by ensuring that longstanding residents are not unfairly displaced. We'll discuss programs and resources to utilize as you work towards redevelopment, as well as highlight some real-world examples of uplifting and preserving communities in action. After the presentations, we'll have a moderated Q&A where you as audience members get to decide what topics you'd like to hear more about. We'll also set some time aside for you to submit your own questions. It is my pleasure to introduce our experts for today. First up, Dr. Nefeli Bompodi is an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Dr. Bompodi's expertise is in reactive, transport, and environmental geochemistry, data-driven approaches in environmental systems, sustainable land reuse, societal impacts from environmental stressors, and environmental policy. She has previously served as the project manager of the Technical Assistance for Brownfields Program, EPA Region 1, at the University of Connecticut, where she assisted communities with brownfield redevelopment projects across New England. She received a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Connecticut, a Master's of Science in Water Resources Science and Technology, and a diploma in civil engineering from the National Technical University of Athens, Greece. Gail Montplaisir, president of Taurus Development Group, started the Taurus companies in 1987 and has successfully run the construction and development of numerous single-family homes, multifamily buildings, and mixed-use projects. Gail looks forward to training a new crew of young people to become proficient in the construction industry and to lead crews and teams in solar, green roof, and energy efficiency industries, as well as real estate professionals. Gail spends her leisure time walking and hiking, tending her certified tree farm, swimming, and playing ping pong. Alexander McLean is a licensed professional planner currently serving as a principal planner for the city of East Orange, but began his career in planning as an environmental planner for the city of New York, starting with the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and more recently served as the Chief Policy and Compliance Officer for Jersey City's Division of Affordable Housing, where he oversaw the preparation of affordable housing agreements for projects with municipally mandated inclusionary units. And finally, Carrie Martin, NJIT TAB's Environmental Sustainability Planner, strives to create safe, vibrant, and resilient communities as an environmental planning professional. She currently serves as the subject matter expert on climate resiliency and sustainability at NJIT TAB, which provides free technical assistance to government entities and nonprofit organizations in EPA Regions 2 and 4. Ms. Martin has 4 years of experience in private consulting where she helps state, regional, and local government entities assess and reduce the risks to natural hazards and climate threats. Ms. Martin holds a Master of City and Regional Planning and a Graduate Certificate in Coastal Climate Risk and Resilience from Rutgers. She received her bachelor's degree in Public Policy and Environmental Policy from William & Mary. Ms. Martin is licensed as a Certified Professional Planner through the American Institute of Certified Planners. So, without further ado, let's get started. Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fatima. So as Fatima explained, here at NJIT TAB, we are the technical assistance provider for EPA Regions 2 and 4. We assist with territorial governments, regional governments, counties, tribal entities, and local government entities and nonprofits as they attempt to learn about, identify, assess, clean up, and redevelop brownfield sites. Next slide. So we provide our assistance through a number of ways. We have our Brownfields Academy, our Brownfield Community Engagement and Educational Forums, as well as one-on-one technical assistance. Next slide. So our Brownfields Academy is available at njit.edu/tab. There you can find recordings of past webinars, such as this one when it's ready, how-to videos, news, upcoming events, as well as resources such as funding sources and important federal and state contacts. Next slide. Our educational forums include Brownfield Basics workshops, which covers what a brownfield is and how to go through the development process from start to finish. Grant writing workshops, particularly for the US EPA Brownfields program. Webinars such as this and Breaking Brownfields, where a entity or a nonprofit will present specific challenges on a site, and we have a panel of private sector experts to obtain feedback on how to overcome those challenges. Next slide. And then, of course, we have our one-on-one technical assistance, where we can tailor our assistance to your specific needs. Some of the things we can do is build you help identify funding sources for your funding stack, help you prioritize sites that you've already identified, as well as conduct community redevelopment and visioning workshops and help you build that out. Awesome. So that's a little bit about our technical service provider. Next slide, we have Nefeli Bompoti, who's now going to discuss the Brownfields Revitalization Anti-Displacement Strategies program, also funded by the US EPA. Nefeli?
Thank you, Kari. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So today I'll be talking a little bit about how we actually tracking displacement risks in communities and what are the strategies that communities, and when we say communities, we refer mostly to municipalities and also nonprofit organizations. So what kind of strategies you all could implement in order to protect the existing residents. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our program, or the BRADS program, as we call it for short. Essentially, our program is focusing on three main aspects. We are an interdisciplinary team of engineers, planners, and also sociologists. So all of us, we work together to do research on gentrification issues and also anti-displacement strategies as they relate to brownfield redevelopment. At the same time, besides our research and scholarly work, we also develop guidance and practitioner guides for tracking displacement and also strategies, again, to mitigate those displacement risks. But at the same time, we also work with communities one-to-one. Our program is a nationwide program, so we work with municipalities and nonprofits across the nation, providing technical assistance for projects that again relate to brownfield sites as again as associated to minimizing displacement risks. And our program is funded by the EPA with a cooperative agreement, and will be a technical assistance provider for displacement, again minimizing displacement specifically for the next couple of years. Next slide, please. So I'll start by the very basic definitions of what do we mean by gentrification and also displacement. So typically the gentrification processes that are triggered in many cases after a significant public or private investment happens in a particular area. And how do we actually see these processes triggered is by seeing an influx of new residents, but also new businesses in the area that often have, let's say, higher income, or have a greater educational attainment, or have a different cultural background or race and ethnicity. And in many cases, I mean, these two processes are actually interconnected, gentrification and displacement. It doesn't mean that one happens after the other. Sometimes, displacement can also start earlier too. And essentially the displacement refers to the movement of the existing residential community or the existing businesses after that private investment happens. So displacement could be voluntary or involuntary in many cases, and it could be driven just simply by market forces, but also the factors could be more complex, right? Basically rooted to different like social, political, and also, other cultural factors that may be happening as a response to the neighborhood change. Next slide, please. So I have this example here, and this is a very simplified model. It's actually, an old model that was developed back in the late 80s that basically describes the gentrification process as a linear process. We know that it's definitely not a linear process, it's definitely more complex. But I always bring this up because it shows the different how the different stages of, for example, disinvestment, where we see the decline in market values, we see a lot of abandoned properties, how this stage, right, after the new development starts in a particular area where we start seeing inexpensive housing options, small scale renovations, and then this acts as a catalyst for the growth phase where we have a lot of like developer investment, rapid increasing property values, and then the influx of higher income households starts coming into the area. And then we see at the end, right, that transformation of the area essentially that often is illustrated by a lack of housing. Of course, I mean, we'll discuss this a little bit more at the end as well, and also the displacement of lower income households or other vulnerable groups within the community. Next slide, please. And this is deeply an environmental justice issue. So the processes of gentrification and displacement, although in many cases they are triggered, right, by market forces, however, right, the phenomenon, right, is deeply rooted in environmental in racism essentially, and discriminatory land use policies, right, of the past. So what happens here, right? We have brownfield sites. We all want to make sure that we capture all the positive, right, aspects of brownfields redevelopment, making sure that we have a cleaner environment, right? We improve communities' health. There is economic growth. There is infrastructure upgrade. All the things that we want to see, right, within the community. But at the same time, we also need to acknowledge that this process could trigger that gentrification, right? Could trigger gentrification processes. And we want to be aware of what happens when the neighborhood changes. Do the existing residents capture all the benefits of the environmental cleanup and the redevelopment, or are they being displaced and then just hire, a new influx of higher income residents coming to the area and get all the benefits? Next slide, please. So, and I wanted to give an example here of how this has happened in the past. This is actually from Philadelphia, and it has to do with a lot of like a huge infrastructure, let's say, investment that has happened over the past 20 years. And it's interesting because this study was actually looking into particular links with gentrification after what happened after that green infrastructure upgrade within the city of Philadelphia. And what the authors noticed here, and it's very interesting, the fact that although there's so many, I believe it was more than 1,000 infrastructure, like green infrastructure interventions within the city, improving the stormwater management, improving all the different aspects of how they manage essentially stormwater. It was mostly about stormwater management, and they tracked basically what happened with the demographic shifts within a certain census tracts from a certain period of time. So they started seeing these demographic shifts in income and race. And besides the influx of new residents, right, of a higher income, they also saw that the lower income residents within certain census tracts, they actually migrated, right, to other areas. What was interesting about the study was the fact that they actually captured the credit scores of Black individuals within the community, and they saw that they were actually more vulnerable compared to the white populations within the area. So it's very important to track, right, what is happening with the most vulnerable groups within the communities that, yes, we want to have more infrastructure upgrades, but at the same time, we have to be conscious about that. Right, next slide. So when we look at indicators of how a neighborhood is changing, or in other words, how we actually trying to find indicators that prompt, let's say, to gentrification processes that are occurring within the community, we basically look at three different categories. We look at real estate parameters, right, foreclosures, right, evictions that are maybe happening within the area, and of course, how the market is changing, if it's appreciating, right? We also look at socio-demographic indicators, such as, for example, the housing values, right? Are they increasing? That's also an indicator. What is happening with the rents, the housing cost burdens, the median household income, the percent of renters themselves. Is there enough affordable housing? And at the same time, we also track what is happening with regards to the residents themselves. Do we have more non-white populations? Do we have a different educational attainment, limited English proficiency? And of course, we also look at the proximity to amenities, so parameters that are more place-based or refer to the built environment. Public transportation, jobs, and the quality of infrastructure in general. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to track, let's say, the displacement risks within your community, those indicators are parameters where we typically look at, and at the same time, some things to consider when you're, let's say, designing your study. You have to think about, first of all, what would be the scale, right? Or focus area, would it be the neighborhood, the city, the county? Are we going to analyze block groups or census tracts? What's going to be the time or the period of analysis, right? How far back do we have to actually go in order to see, these changes within the community? And then we also look at different thresholds in order to be able to say which areas are gentrifying. I don't have a lot of time to talk about all the strategies and all the methodologies to basically track displacement, but we can, of course, talk about this a little bit more. If you're interested, you can always reach out to my team and we can have an in-depth discussion. Next slide, please. I know that we don't have a lot of time. So if designing your own study is something that would require, of course, like a lot of time, effort, resources, there are actually several tools that you can use to basically track displacement. So, and that's one of the examples that we have, for New York and a little bit of New Jersey. The Urban Displacement Project actually has put together an interactive platform where they look at different criteria and they rank essentially certain census tracts according to if the area has gentrified or they are at high risk of gentrifying. So you can always go back to this interactive tools and look at some of these areas. Now the Urban Displacement Project does not cover the entire US. I know that they also have a map for California and other areas in the West. But there are other tools as well within the nation that you can look into. Next slide, please. And that actually, the slide I have here for a little bit more context on, if you wanted to design your study in order to be able to basically identify risks within, within displacement risks within the community, there are established methodologies, right, that look into different indicators, and there are certainly, approaches that you can implement, or you can reach out to our team and we can work on this together through our technical assistance program. These are typical studies that we support. We don't have a lot of let's say, capacity to support a lot of studies, but we definitely, reserve our resources for the communities that need it the most. So if you're looking into supporting such a study, and you would like to, let's say, do this, on your own, there are definitely, a lot of methodologies that we can assist with. And then perhaps we don't have a lot of time to actually talk about, and I want to make sure that my other panelists have also, the time to talk about how, some of the anti-displacement practices are implemented in the, in the practice. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I'll go through the last slide here to say that besides, right, identifying the risk of displacement, right, there are strategies, there are remedies on how you actually prevent it. So a lot of the things that we typically go through the needs assessment, right, to be able to say which areas have, the most risk. And once we understand which areas have the most risk, then we basically discuss what type of strategies you can actually implement in order to mitigate these risks. And these strategies could range from implementing, for example, eviction policies, or tax abatement strategies, or even inclusionary zoning, depending on the type of risks and the type of area. I would say that there is no approach that fits all. So that's why I encourage you to reach out to us. Next slide, please. And we can discuss more about what strategies would be more applicable, right, for your program. And with that, I would like to basically end with the recommendation that you can always, reach out to our team. We do have resources, and this is a new guide that we just released that is focusing on basically determining, this factors and methodologies that you can use to track the risk of displacement, essentially, as it associates with Brownfields redevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nefeli. Gail Montplaisir is up next.
Sorry, I was muted. We all know that, right? We've done that. You get on and you start talking and nobody can hear you. Fatima, I think you're going to put up my slides. Yes. So the first several slides are just some pretty renderings of the project that we're developing in Syracuse, New York. It's called Salina First. Salina Street, South Salina Street is where we're working. And it is an underserved community. It's a Black community in Syracuse, New York. And we wanted to make sure that the community and the city and anyone who looks at it wants to know that we believe that Salina needs to come first now. And I'm partners with, could you go next slide, please? And I think I have a delay, so I might not see it as quickly as you do. Salina First is the first all-minority-led commercial development in Syracuse, New York. I am from Washington, D.C. I'm a developer there, but I was asked by two Black entrepreneurs in Syracuse to come to Syracuse to help them buy back the block, to help them reinvest in their community, to make sure that their community does not continue to be ignored and or displaced as development does start to occur. Next slide, please. So these are my partners, Emmanuel Henderson and Eli Smith. Next slide, please. So you can see, I won't read everything to you. Obviously, you can read. So, the concept here is that we really need to make sure that the Black community has a say in what happens in their community. My partners did not want to leave it to the quote unquote powers that be, as well-meaning as they may be, to decide what would happen in their community. So we've been very excited to be able to work on this with a very, very diverse group. Next slide, please. This is what the property looked like before we purchased it. It's approximately 2 acres and it's about 6 blocks south of downtown. Now it actually looked a little bit worse than this. This is already after we took down a lot of weed trees that had been spreading and cleaned up the needles and all of the other negative evidence of negative activities that occur on brownfield sites that are left sitting for decades in underserved communities. And I would like to make sure that that's clear. This property, nearly 2 acres, was sitting vacant for decades and is a brownfield, and so was completely unprotected from, or the community was completely unprotected from it. Next slide, please. Development has started to occur in the area, so that orange circle shows where our site is, puts it into perspective as to what's around it. You can see that in general, it looks fairly run down, and it still does. Right in the foreground, though, is a project that is JMA Wireless. So one of the things that Syracuse decided to focus on through their investment is to make sure that they were making it very friendly for technologies and technological companies. So JMA Wireless does 5G equipment for the entire industry. Next slide. Oh, sorry. My anti-displacement strategies. So it's interesting because there are, I mean, Nefeli went into some of them, and I'll do this quickly too, is that, you know, community engagement is extremely important, but a lot of this has to happen in a certain order. So I'll look at that next, but we have mixed income and mixed use development. That's important. Local hiring and job training, anti-displacement policies, policies as opposed to strategies, because we have to recognize that policies actually come from the government generally, as opposed to from the developer. Preservation of cultural identity, incentivizing local ownership, green infrastructure and environmental justice, and site amenities. Next slide, please. So it's amazing the number of steps that need to occur in a development process. And any of you who are involved in development understand that development is something between an art and a science. And we have a lot of laws and policies to which we have to subscribe, and we have to follow them. And these are just some of them. Next slide, please. So in the pre-development phase, that one of the first things that we have to do is actually to identify the real estate that could be acquired that is a brownfield and that needs to both have remediation as well as development. We have to do a zoning analysis, we have to do environmental studies, we have to have a certain amount of equity investment and funding for the pre-development work, because none of it is free. Environmental studies cost thousands of dollars, as does zoning analysis. Once we have some initial funding, we can then do preliminary design based on the above. So zoning, we can't just go into a city and say, oh, look, you've got a brownfield, I'm going to remediate it, and I'm going to build exactly what I want there. We have to make sure that it is in line with the zoning that the jurisdiction itself has focused for that particular area of the, of the city or area. It doesn't have to be a city. And we then had to negotiate with both the Department of Environmental Conservation as well as FEMA, because this project, as many brownfield sites are, is complicated. It's complicated both because of the pollution, but it's also complicated because this particular one happens to also be in a flood zone. So I note on here the nonprofit status could be a benefit. One of the reasons for that is, for example, Nefeli's programs, and any program that's coming out of the EPA, they will provide funding and grants, but only for nonprofit entities or for jurisdictions. So a for-profit developer cannot go in and say, hi, Nefeli, you know, can you help me remediate this brownfield for $2 million? Because that's not what they do. So I think that it's a good idea to think about what type of an entity you want to form to make sure that you can get the best out of it for your development project. The IDAs are a really good source of finding land and also working with them as a partner. So public-private partnerships are really important. Brownfield cleanup agreement as the owner. So if the land that you're purchasing is from an IDA, the IDA can actually go in and apply for a brownfield cleanup position that the developer, as the non-owner, can't do until they actually own the property. Therefore, the risk would be higher. It's less high if the IDA can go in and obtain that initial agreement anyway. And the jurisdiction having authority, we always want to be able to partner with those organizations, and partnership generally means that you work through the process with them, as Nefeli invited people to do also, so that you can find out the best way to accomplish your goals. For us, what we did is we benched the site up, taking it out of the floodplain in all the areas where the buildings were to be located, so that we avoided a lot of the really expensive remediation type things that have to be done if you're building in a floodplain. And so that was something we were able to work out with FEMA as we went through the process. So I say all of those things first to say we're all talking about community outreach and how we really need to be talking to the community about what they want. But we were not really in a position to talk to the community about what we wanted or what they might want until we were able to go through these processes, because we don't really have the means to explain to each individual how complicated it is. We had to know that we could build something and approximately what we could build before we could actually start our community outreach. And we did that with the lists of people that I think I had put on an early, I think it's on the next slide. So we can look at that in a second. You'll also need to be looking at this point at grants and targeted funding that will help with the remediation as well as the overall community development aspects. So I just named some of the organizations there that can help with that. Construction lenders. We also need to remember bankers are bankers. They're usually very conservative. They're not there to help you remediate. What they're there to do is to reduce their risk, to provide funding for the construction, and hopefully to be able to support the work that needs to be done. But they are not grant givers. They are not the ones who are actually going to be funding the remediation per se. There are CDFIs and then state subsidies, because we have in New York, I think New York is very well situated and has a lot of really good programs, including the Homes and Community Renewal, HCR, and then you have to have specialized contractors as you work through these processes, because not just any contractor can do remediation. Next slide, please. Here are some of the people with whom we did our initial outreach. So again, I won't name them all for you, but some of the really important ones was the Syracuse Southside Tomorrow's Communities Today, TNT. It's a community development group that really kind of reaches deeply into the community. And we worked very closely with them, with the Urban Jobs Task Force, with home headquarters, Syracuse Housing Authority, and it really talked about all of the things that are needed and could be done. This just shows some of our community meetings. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give short shrift to the politicians because, of course, we had to work with the mayor and the mayor's office, Onondaga County, the county executive. So we were working with all of the political organizations as well as the community organizations. And this all needs to be done simultaneously so that it can be a successful development project. And again, these are just some of the things that we worked at and that are going on that can really help to move things forward for the community, having local hiring, job training, business support, and it means collaboration because developers are developers. They're not here to do all of these other things, but they can help to organize groups that can help them to accomplish them. Next slide, please. I think you guys are seeing the slides before me. So when I talk about anti-displacement policies and strategies, again, the policies have to be adopted by the political entities of the area. So one of the things that we've seen a lot in the District of Columbia, where I do a lot of work, is that property taxes years ago were not adjusted as development was occurring. So as we as developers would come into the area and put all of this investment in, and yes, raise the value of all of the real estate around us, that meant that the city was then taxing people higher and higher amounts, while they were not necessarily in a position to be able to pay those increased taxes. It could help to have financial incentives for small businesses, streamlining permitting and review and licensing policies. All of these things make it harder for people who are in the community to continue to stay there if we don't pass policies that actually help. And when I say the last one, tenant protection policies within reason, yes, it's good to say that you can't evict someone for really minor things. However, one of the things that we've seen since COVID is that there have been a lot of housing developers and housing owners who have had to go out of business because some of those anti-eviction processes have made it such that they can't pay their mortgage. And remember, those conservative banks, they don't tell the developer or the owner that, oh, you don't have to pay your mortgage because you're not getting paid rent. There has to be some way that we can balance that so that business owners and developers don't lose all of their properties because they can't obtain rents from their tenants, and the laws prevent them from evicting them. So I think we have to look at all of those things and make sure that they work for both business owners as well as for the community residents. We try to use strategies such as, working with the community, meeting with them regularly, forming groups. We formed a group of real estate agents who want to work together to help to lease up our property, and to really kind of keep that as active and fun. And we had two taglines: our community, our future, and embrace, not displace. Next. Oh, and we also formed a community wealth fund so that we're sharing a percentage of our profits with the community as we move forward. So we always have to look at what kind of businesses are going to be the right businesses for the community. And so we just named a few of those. And I think developers, looks like this is a total repeat. I'm not quite sure how that happened, and I apologize. So we can go to the next slide. We've created what we call the full circle approach. And the idea is that my partners and I are investing in the community. We're working then with the community to develop this project that helps to meet the needs of the community. And the idea is that as we invest in the community and grow this project, that they will then come and lease from us and or open their businesses there, and thus help create their own means to grow their wealth, to hire local people. And then the idea is that they will then reinvest in the community. So it's a full circle from our investment to their investment, but that we all are pulling in the same direction. So the rest are pretty pictures. And so Fatima, you can just go through them, you know, and that's it. There's really nothing to say about them. They're pretty pictures. This is what we're planning on building. These are some sample apartments that we already have built. This is part of our community. And I think the last several slides are just part of our construction process. And then we're looking forward to cutting the ribbon and bringing in our tenants. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gail. Next and last up, we're going to have Alexander McLean.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Fatima, Dr. Bounty, Gail. I just want to start off by just applauding you on your project. I think first and foremost, having served in Jersey City as an affordable housing assistant director, and working with developers, and coming out of New York, I think the big focus for me has always been ensuring that low income and moderate income households are living in quality housing and living with dignity. And I know that in New York City, I know even with NYCHA, they have a program right now that they're retrofitting a lot of existing buildings to improve living standards across the city. So it's really encouraging to see developers really try to make that a priority. So thank you. So yeah, I'll start. So yeah, so I'm covering, as was mentioned before, my background is in environmental planning and affordable housing. So I'll be covering my experience working with brownfield sites as it relates to affordable housing in New York City and in New Jersey. So we can start the next slide. Yeah, so my presentation it should be pretty quick. There's a lot of material. I honestly can't get through all of it, line by line, but I think I'll just make sure to leave everyone with the general gist of each one of my topics here. So we're starting off with the New York City's environmental review process, also New York State for that matter as well. I have a case study here, a property in Brooklyn that I was project managing at HBD, and then this kind of ended with the Brownfield site in Jersey City, so the big Bayfront redevelopment site of 440. All right, next slide. All right, so this is just the cover of the technical manual for New York City's environmental review handbook. This was recently updated in 2021. I actually worked with closely with one of the folks over at City Planning in Manhattan, who kind of shepherded and oversaw all the agencies that were updating their sections. All right, next slide. So just a little background on the New York City environmental review process. All right, so the seeker, the New York City environmental review process was established, adopted in 1973. So this is right after Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act in 1969, and is actually ahead of the state. So you know, again, it's New York City again is a maverick in this regard, and then that was in 19. So just 2 years ahead. So this process is triggered, as is with this at the state level too, when any agency is required to consider discretionary action to fund, undertake, or approve a project that may affect the surrounding environment. And the review process covers 19 different categories of analysis, and I just include a couple here: socioeconomic conditions. So we're looking at housing impacts, open space. So you want to ensure that if you're talking about a large development, you want to make sure that there's a corresponding amount of recreational space so per resident in the census tract area. Also hazardous materials, which is what my presentation will be focusing on, and then the transportation, among others. So you're talking about air quality, community facilities, and so forth. And I'll let folks, if you want to go online and check it out, I have links at the end for anyone who wants to do more research. All right, next slide. All right, so and to back up a little bit more. So at the state level, state has passed the State Environmental Quality Review Act in 1975, as I mentioned before. So if you go under Part 617, Title 6 of the state's codes, rules, and regulations, which governs the Department of Environmental Conservation, they outline you have 3 different levels of review. So you start with the lowest level of review, which is Type 1 actions. You have 46 of them that are listed by the state, and they basically just cover stuff which essentially is maintenance for maintenance projects that an agency has to authorize. And the next level up is the Type 1 actions, and these are the kind of bigger projects. Say you're building a highway, or it's a pretty massive residential development. That may trigger an EIS. So those are that's the classification for that level of development. And then you have unlisted actions, which pretty much are exactly as it implies. They're not listed, so they haven't met the threshold for Type 1, but they exceed the threshold for Type 2. So, and that was most of my projects in New York City. Next slide. All right, so I just wanted to kind of give folks, as I mentioned before, an idea of what the Type 2 actions look like. So I have looking at residential development and non-residential development. So for residential, we're talking about the construction or expansion of a single family, 2-family, 3-family residence on an approved lot. So you're talking about usually as of right development with necessary utility connections, maintenance, upgrades to drinking water well, septic tanks, conveyances of land in connection with therein. And for non-residential, you're talking about the construction or expansion of a primary accessory appurtenance for a non-residential structure or facility involving less than 4,000 square feet. So it's a pretty small project. Type 1 actions. So these thresholds correspond to the population size of a municipality in New York State. So they're pretty clear. So obviously you'll start with taking one here, get 10 units in a municipality that has not adopted a zoning or subdivision regulation. So you're talking about an incredibly tiny community. You have a lot of that. I personally, I drive around I've been before boards all throughout New Jersey, and there are some towns that don't even have planning office staffed, so they're they're pretty much relying on consultants to do a lot of work, and they don't have a lot of development going on. So anything going on is a big deal. Looking at the next box here for non-residential development, so you have a project that involves a physical alteration of 10 acres. These are the kind of projects that are going to trigger a more detailed review. All right, next slide. All right, so as I mentioned before, I just wanted to focus on the hazardous materials section of the secret manual. So we're talking about, you have to, as a developer, make sure you just answer these basic questions to determine whether or not a review is required, or how involved a review is required for a project. So here we have some questions here. If the elevated levels of hazardous material exist on a site, and the project would increase pathways to human or environmental exposure. If the project would introduce new activities or processes using hazardous materials, and the risk of human or environmental exposure is increased. Or if the project would introduce a population to potential human or environmental exposure from off-site sources. And that was the case for the case study that I've included in my presentation. And I think I have a note here too. So for projects that would be classified as unlisted, there are 10 preliminary questions that must be answered to confirm if there is a possibility of one of the 3 above scenarios occurring, and include the following, which is on the next slide. All right, so I have some screening questions here. These are directly from these the short form. So you have the secret short form requires you to go through all of these screening questions for all 19 analysis categories, and these are the questions for hazardous materials. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are just some key elements here, and I'm going to try to speed up here because we're reaching the end of the event. But one of the key ones here is does the proposed project site have a existing institutional control, E-designation? That this is the case for the case study that I included. New York City has, if there's a big rezoning like the Williamsburg Greenpoint rezoning that took place in 2005 and was expanded in 2009. All the areas that are within that rezoning area are analyzed for hazardous material, and if they are flagged, they get an E-designation, so that if any development happens to occur on a site, they are a very thorough review is conducted. Next slide. All right, so this is the case study here. So back in 2015, I was the project manager overseeing this property in Brooklyn. This is at 339 Berry Street and on South 5th Street in Brooklyn. It's right directly north of the Williamsburg Bridge. Next slide. Yeah, so this project was located on lot 6, 37 and 41 on block 2443 in Williamsburg. And it involved the approval and designation of the site as an urban development action area. Which is essentially the same thing as pretty much in New Jersey, the equivalent of New Jersey identifying an area needed redevelopment. In this case, though, in New York City, you're talking about the disposition of city-owned land, and pretty much it's requiring designating it as an area in need of urban renewal. And this, as far as financing goes, I know kind of Dr. Bounty and Gail had touched upon this too. There are many programs that are required to kind of address the issue of displacement. And in New York City's case, we have a number of programs, HPD has the extremely low and low income program. It makes sure that at least 80% of the units are set aside for low income households, up to 80% of area median income. And at least 15% of those units have to be set aside for formerly homeless individuals. And in this case, we're talking about a 12-story building containing 54 affordable units with ground floor retail space and community facility space. Next slide. All right, so as I mentioned before, this property did receive an E designation as part of the Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning. It's a formerly city-owned site that was also used by an auto body shop, which was operated by the NYPD. So definitely a use that required further review. And as I mentioned before, what the E designation ensures that appropriate investigation and remediation is performed. And initially, it began at the local level with the Mayor's Office of Environmental Review, but it was elevated to the state, as I'll mention in the following slides. Next slide. So this particular developer ended up discontinuing his work with the city's environmental review office and ended up working with the Brownfield, the New York State's Brownfield Cleanup Program, which provides financial incentives in the form of tax credits. That this program has been amended in 2015 and then amended again in 2022 because of excessive credits were being awarded to developers. But they provide a thorough review and technical assistance to developers to address remediation issues. So we have, in this case, it was soil contamination and groundwater contaminants. Next slide. All right, so just coming back to the seeker review approach, the manual requires that developers prepare a remedial action plan and a construction health and safety plan to identify short-term and long-term risks. And they identify different strategies for soil contamination, how to remediate the process, to mitigate risk or eliminate it. That can be in the form of the construction of a subsurface barrier. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of vapor barriers to kind of address the exposure to contaminants for residents in a building. For groundwater, this can take the form of capping with clean soil, standard paving, and multi-layer engineering membranes to reduce the migration of contaminants. This was the case for this property where there was off-site groundwater contamination coming in, and they were trying to seal it to ensure that the site was protected. Next slide. And there's also removal techniques that are included here for excavation of hazardous waste and petroleum. They usually transport that. It's common to see it transported out of New York State to remediate the soil. There's also treatment approaches here to reduce the concentration or alter the characteristics of contaminants on a site. Next slide. All right, and I was just going to wrap up here with the. I'll try to fly through this case study of the Bayfront redevelopment project. I'll just kind of note that I wasn't too terribly involved in the actual remediation part because it was done well before I even started working in Jersey City. That was back in 2003 and 2008. So next slide. So yeah, just some background here. The Bayfront site, as mentioned before, is right off of Route 440 on the far west side of Jersey City. You can see Manhattan in the foreground, and then the actual development site right along the Hackensack River. And it's a 100-acre site. It's the result of a canal that was extended from Newark into the New York Harbor. And it was that particular site on the west side of Jersey City was developed by several chemical companies. And back in the 1920s. One of the industrial byproducts was the chromium, which is used in the production of stainless steel. And they, unfortunately, that manufacturing, those byproducts were dumped into the wetland in the Hackensack River by one particular company, the Mutual Chemical Company, that operated a plant on the site until 1954. Jersey City constructed a waste processing plant and incinerator around the 1950s. In 2008, there was a settlement agreement between the city of Jersey City and Honeywell, which is a successor of Mutual Company, requiring Honeywell to remediate the site and sell development rights to the city. Next slide. All right, so just a quick chronology of events here. So I guess around the time that the settlement occurred, the city council adopted the Bayfront 1 redevelopment plan to kind of re-envision the site. And then there was the adoption and acquisition ordinance for public financing, acquisition of the development lots in that area. And then to 2019, the city became a fee simple owner of the development lots. This map is in the redevelopment plan, which you can find online on the city's website. Next slide. All right, so in 2020, the JCRA, or the Jersey City Redevelopment Agency, conditionally designated BRP Cove Point LLC as a developer to develop the phase 1 development area, and that consists of portions of block 21901.1, lots 4 and 6, to create the development sites below in phase 1. So you have development lots 31 and 25. And there was a conditional resolution, and the same month, designated Bayfront Development Partners, it's a joint venture of the Penrose LLC company and Omni Bayfront, Jersey City, as the redeveloper of the portion of the phase 1 development area. Next slide. And I'm just highlighting those lots, so because I know it looks kind of confusing, it's easy to get lost. Next slide. So the JCRA and Bayfront Development Partners entered into a funding agreement for the costs incurred by the JCRA for certain pre-development activities with respect to both development of lot 26 and 32, including but not limited to negotiating good faith preparation of the redevelopment agreement and other related activities. I don't believe that it includes remediation. I'm sure at that point it had already been addressed. Next slide. Okay, and yeah, those are the those lots identified in this slide here. Next slide. All right, and so there were just a few more events here, pretty much kind of just wrapping up pre-development planning. I'm not going to go through each one of them because we're kind of pressed for time. But essentially, you know, we're talking about most of the lots on the southern portion of the development site that have been planned, and you know, where site plans were drawn up, and their financing was secured, and the capital stacking was already wrapped up. Next slide. So, yeah, this is just some additional events here. So, yeah, the JCRA, they were designated BRP Cove Point for additional sites here. You have development like lot 31, 25, 30, and 29. And if you move on to the next slide, those are the lots identified at this particular point of the designation process. Next slide. All right, so this is the last one here. So overall, we're talking about, as far as the planned development, it's 8,000 units in total per the redevelopment plan. We're talking about for the phase 1, 1,735 dwelling units. 379 of them are going to be affordable at 60% or below area median income, with 2,000 total planned units for the entire development site, the entire 100-acre development site, and 260 workforce units with incomes between 80 and 120% of AMI at 34,000 square foot charter school and 340,000 square foot commercial space. Sorry. Next slide. All right, and these are just some links for folks if you're interested in doing more research on New York City or environmental review process or Jersey City's Bayfront project. With that, that should be it. The next slide. Okay, yep, that's my presentation. Thank you all for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Alexander. So Fatima, do you want to lead us into the question and comment period if any of our attendees have any questions or comments for the panelists?
Yes. Well, before I do that, I just want to thank everyone for presenting today. I hope these presentations inspired our audience to incorporate anti-displacement strategies in their own redevelopment projects. For those outside the New York, New Jersey area, I know we were a little focused on that today. We encourage you to check out your state's programs and policies. Feel free to also reach out if you need additional guidance. I'll actually be posting our panelists as well as NJIT TAB's contact information at this end of this webinar. I know also a few folks hopped off. I know time is sometimes a little bit short and we went a little bit over, but that's okay. I'll be posting those links and information to those who didn't get to see it as well. With that information out of the way, let's start our Q&A session. Has anyone heard of these projects being set up as a community land trust? Is there an appetite for CLT out there?
Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of experience with community land trusts. I am hearing more about it. People are more interested in it more recently now that I'm in a leadership position in East Orange. But yeah, no, I don't have a ton of experience with that.
I only know of one community land trust that is in the District of Columbia. And I know that their projects take a very long time and the financing is challenging. So is there an appetite for it? I'm not sure. I think because of the the technical needs that really require a lot of funding. So I'm not sure that there would be a quote unquote appetite for it.
Yeah, I just want to note that. So in lieu of that, I mean, I know in East Orange and Jersey City, most municipalities, they have city-owned land, and disposition is a big part of that. So I mean, that's one avenue for just ensuring that affordable housing is built, and that's one anti-displacement approach.
Right, so community land trust, I mean, we've seen a couple of examples, and I agree with you both, Gail and Alex. I mean, there are certainly challenges, but when operating a land trust, but they could be a pathway to actually, preserve like land within the community and make sure that, the affordability is maintained. We had discussions with, different towns, different municipalities where there is an active land trust. And I mean, I can see, from both sides, right? Where, there's funding needed, let's say for the land trust in order to be able, to acquire the properties, make sure also that has the maintenance. And at the same time, there are challenges with, communicating that need with the municipality. However, I mean, even if it's a land trust or a community ownership model, in both cases, I think you need a champion, right? A community champion who is willing to lead these efforts, right? Who is willing to actually, go through all these discussions, also conduct the community engagement piece, which is very important. We've seen a community ownership model in Louisville, Kentucky has been actually, the effort of many, many years of engagement in order to be able to actually, reach a stage where they are more organized. It's an interesting model. But I mean, they could they could certainly be the pathway, right? It's one of the strategies that one could implement within the community, but there are definitely a lot of challenges as well.
That was a good point. I was thinking of it in terms of individual projects as opposed to the whole community. Syracuse has a land trust and they, a land bank, actually, they call it, and they own the properties, but they do not actually do any type of remediation. So I think that depends upon what that actual goal is. I think that a lot of times the land banks hold the properties, but they don't do remediation, and then they sell them to someone who will do the remediation.
Right, and we've seen land banks, for example, here, in Connecticut, for example, the land banks typically, I mean, they would, right, flip the property. They will maintain the property for the necessary time that is needed to clean it up, and then, right, they would pass it on to the municipality or sell it to a developer. So they don't necessarily keep it. So there are different models, I guess, within the nation of how this could work.
Great. I just wanted to amplify one comment and then answer one more question before we wrap up. That was in the chat. So the Center for Community Progress has mentioned that their organization has a lot of resources on how land banks can get involved in brownfield acquisition, remediation, and reuse. As well, I'm going to put in the chat a publication I found useful on how it's from the Lincoln Institute, and it highlights how land banks and community land trusts can partner together for affordable housing opportunities. So resources from that I just mentioned, as well as the Center for Community Progress, is going to be in the chat feature. And then our last question before we wrap up, has anyone seen any effective displacement prevention programs in respect to redevelopment projects or brownfield redevelopment?
There are examples where this has been implemented successfully. Now that we're still in initial stages of bringing awareness into this issue, I would definitely argue that it's still early. We've seen a lot of bad examples, the truth is, compared to seeing the success. But Gail, I mean, you showcase one of the good examples, so perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit more on this.
Well, so I think that I think that the goals are there, and there are developers that are looking for ways to develop and to do it without creating undue gentrification. But it does, in my opinion, take a collaboration with the politicians and those who make the policies, because we can't do it alone. When we put that kind of investment in, you will have to expect that there will be values that increase. And if we simply increase values and then tax people on that increased value, whether they have the money or not, is going to make a big difference as to whether there's displacement or not. So I think that we really need to find more models of partnership, public-private partnership. And I do believe that Syracuse is doing that very well. I think the state of New York works very well. The Department of Environmental Conservation has the Brownfield tax credits. Not all jurisdictions have that. So, I mean, there could be a problem. One of the things that jurisdictions and banks try to do is make sure that they're not legally liable for anything that happens in regard to the pollution and the remediation. So again, I think that there's this effort to try to offload that liability onto developers. And if all of those liabilities and costs only go to the developers, then the problem is if the jurisdictions are not taking care of the communities by offering incentives and tax relief, you end up with, you don't quite get to the point that you need to, that actually helps to preserve the displacement. I mean, to preserve placement, keeping people in place.
Yeah. I just want to just follow up on Gail's point there. Yeah, I'm and New York State has a fantastic the Brownfield cleanup program is I think it's a pretty effective program. They do cover a combination of the costs from from my understanding of the site preparation for the remediation process and the assessed value of the building. That doesn't include the value of the land. So it's I think they understand that you have to assist the developers in that process. And I can't speak. I think Carrie might be able to touch upon New Jersey's Brownfield program much more in depth than I can, since she's been doing this a little bit longer.
Yeah, I would just mention, as Alex and I are both planning professionals. And so I think the planning portion of this, like Gail went into detail about the pre-development activities and their importance, as well as community outreach. There are 2 planning programs in New Jersey that I think help to set folks up for success. BOA, the Brownfield Opportunity Area Program in New York State, which requires significant community outreach and forethought into the impacts of a potential development, as well as its sister program in New Jersey, the BDA program, the Brownfields Development Area Program. So those efforts are like a planning, are funding opportunities, but they also streamline permitting and require ample planning and forethought, which I think tees up a good end product in terms of development. So with that, it is time for us to all wrap up. So Fatima, do you want to close us out?
All right. Thank you for presenting, everyone. I hope these presentations inspired our audience to incorporate anti-displacement strategies in their own redevelopment projects. For those outside the New York, New Jersey area, we encourage you to check out your state's programs and policies. Feel free to reach out if you need additional guidance. I'll be posting our panelists as well as NJIT TAB's contact information at the end of this webinar. Should anyone present today have any additional questions or comments after this webinar ends, feel free to utilize our post-webinar survey or connect with us on the NJIT TAB LinkedIn page. You may also visit our website at www.njit.edu/tab or other social media platforms to access more information, resources, and news. I have a few upcoming events that I would like to highlight. On December 18th, we're going to have Taller Brownfields, Comunidad, Clima y Sostenibilidad. I hope I didn't mess up that Spanish too poorly. Let me know in the comments how I did. Anyway, as part of NJIT TAB's service provider team, ACOM will be hosting a workshop in Ponce, Puerto Rico. This interactive presentation will cover topics on the impact of brownfields on communities and sustainability and climate change resilience considerations within redevelopment. On January 8th, we'll have the Great Georgia Gas Station cleanup. Ever wonder what's going on with that abandoned gas station on the corner? Join NJIT TAB in a virtual interactive Choose Your Own Adventure to learn what it takes to turn that old filling station into a community asset. We'll explore how this vacant site impacts the neighborhood, dig underground to discover how spilled gasoline affects our environment, and reimagine what the site could be. On January 13th, we're going to have the Kentucky Climate Change and Brownfields Community Workshop. During this virtual workshop, NJIT TAB's Environmental Sustainability Planner, Carrie Martin, and Brownfield Program Coordinator for the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet, Kirsten O'Leary, will address the intersections of energy, environment, and economic development within the context of brownfield redevelopment. They'll illustrate ways in which Kentucky communities can not only build back, but build back better after a climate crisis. And finally, on January 14th, NJIT TAB will be kicking off its webinar series, TAB Talks. These webinars will focus on a multitude of topics within brownfields redevelopment and will deliver a plethora of information each month. Our first TAB Talks, Out with the Old, In with the Renew, will discuss utilizing brownfields for renewable energy. Join NJIT TAB's Brownfield Redevelopment Specialist, Elise Muller, along with a panel of guest speakers, to learn about renewable energy and the potential opportunities and benefits of incorporating them in your brownfield redevelopment projects. You can also start the new year renewing your commitment to brownfield redevelopment by attending the New Jersey Brownfield Summit in February. Last year, we learned to reinvent our brownfield pasts into resilient futures. This year, we'll look further into the future to transform our brownfields to bright fields via climate and green conscious practices. At this year's summit, we're inviting you to join us, as well as numerous panelists from federal, state, and academic organizations and agencies, for thoughtful and collaborative conversations on topics such as climate mitigation, leveraging brownfields for clean energy, green remediation, carbon sequestration, and federal resources and grants. At this year's summit, we'll also be hosting a Breaking Brownfields. In this engaging and collaborative event, a government entity or nonprofit presents their specific brownfield redevelopment challenge to an audience of private sector representatives and obtains feedback on how to overcome these challenges. If you're interested in presenting your challenge, or perhaps providing your unique expertise and experience as a panelist at this year's New Jersey Brownfield Summit, feel free to complete our Breaking Brownfield survey. This survey is not just limited to this year's summit, so feel free to submit a response for a future event near you. Not sure how Breaking Brownfields would look for your group? Check out our video highlighting our most recent Breaking Brownfields in Stony Point, New York. For those who can't make it to our events or would like to access this webinar after today, we post recordings along with presentations and related resources and links on our website at www.njit.edu/tab/webinars. Today, we've highlighted 3 for you that may complement your brownfield journey. Feel free to view those recordings after today's webinar or explore the NJIT tab site to find a vast library of resources, links, and other informative videos. And with that, we thank you for spending some time with us today. We hope this webinar has highlighted the importance of legacy residence in a community and how we should strive to protect the history of a community while revitalizing it in new and transformative ways. I encourage you to think of a mighty oak tree, if you forgive me using an environmental metaphor. But remember, its strength and beauty can be attributed to not only a good local environment, but also its deep and sturdy roots. Remember that as you move forward. Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us today.